Welcome to The Line. A historic number of Native American women are running for elective office around the country, including here in New Mexico. And a 60-second campaign ad is at the center of an unusual lawsuit that is now playing out in Torrance County courts. These are just two of the political stories hitting the news this week. And here to talk about those topics and other stories around New Mexico, I have with me our line of panelists, starting with Laura Sanchez-Rivey. She's an attorney at Cuddy & McCarthy LLP. Andy Lyman's here. He's a reporter for NM Political Report. Majority Whip Daniel Foley is with us. And Mary Hudett, she's a reporter for the Associated Press. Laura, starting with you. New York Times article out just a few days ago. Although not yet been a Native American congresswoman, there are at least 4 indigenous women running for Congress this year. A lot of other seats. Deb Haaland, who is running in New Mexico's 1st district, featured prominently in the article. Your sense of what's happening here? There is clearly a rise of Native women coming up in politics. What's been the beginning of this to you? What's going on here?
Well, I think it's been a long time coming. I mean, I really think that there's been leadership efforts in Native circles for a while now.
Right.
Certainly, we've seen an increase at the state legislative level in different states, and here in New Mexico is the same. We've had a number of female legislators that have been elected and on both sides of the aisle. And so I think that you see that sort of progressing, and I think that along with some of the anti-Trump sentiment that's affected, I think, the Republican Party to a certain extent, has probably inspired some of the women that are now running. Certainly, I think Deb Haaland has that kind of a message. She was a previous state party chair, so that gave her a platform. It gave her an opportunity to kind of get her name out there to a certain extent. But I do think there's a difference between the pre-primary process, because that's a lot of the rank and file Democrats, the real party Democrat activists, and people in the actual primary, the voters. I'm not sure yet if, polls are what they are. I haven't really looked at any, but I would expect that there's probably still a gap in terms of her name ID from your average voter. But we've got some time for her to increase that, certainly.
It's a good foundation to build on. Mary, interestingly, there's been a little bit of pushback, and some folks say that despite her experience running party matters, there's not a whole lot of elected office experience behind her. That's not really stopped anybody before for running for Congress. Should it be an issue for her? Are people just saying, she's hiding behind her ethnicity, to be cruel about it, some people? You know what I mean? What I'm getting at here, it shouldn't matter, should it, at the end of the day?
It's up to the voters at the end of the day. Yeah, and the press will cover every end of it, but voters will decide, and I think there is a lot of enthusiasm. I don't know what the polls show because there hasn't been a ton of polling yet. Her fundraising is toward the top of the pack, and it is a large pack in the Democratic primary. And so I think that those are things that show that there's some enthusiasm behind her candidacy, but this race is just now starting to come to the forefront. I think we're starting to see a pivot toward our attention toward the primaries, and so this is when I think we'll really start to get some answers.
That's right. Dan, interestingly, I mentioned across the country in this New York Times article, 31 Native women running for legislative seats. There's governors' offices being run for, but a good number of these women are also on the conservative side of the spectrum. It's not just the Me Too movement or left leaning folks. Is that a good sign for you that there's spectrum, so to speak?
Yeah, I think look, in New Mexico, for quite a while, some of the biggest supporters of the Republican Party and Republican issues have been Native Americans. I think this is a huge race in New Mexico, because if a Native American can get elected on the Democrat side to the congressional level, I think it could really throw things in disarray in New Mexico when it comes to fundraising and working with Native Americans who have been kind of towards the forefront of raising money and helping get out the vote and do stuff, and they've been very helpful with Republicans.
What would be the turbulence in your mind?
Well, I think if you had a congressional Native American from New Mexico, I think money would all but dry up to the Republican side of New Mexico for Native Americans. I think that support would predominantly go to where the leader is asking it to go, and I think that could be a huge blow for the Republican Party and for raising money and utilizing that money to get out the vote. I'm surprised that we're not talking as well about we do have a U.S. Senator who claims to be Native American who's not. And so, it's going to be interesting to see, what happens when folks are getting to Congress and they're getting in there, and you have people like Elizabeth Warren that says, look, I'm this percentage Native American. It turns out that, now everybody's telling her it's not true and you shouldn't be saying that. But I'm not surprised that there's a push. I mean, you look at the pipeline issue that's gone on. It brought national attention to Native American issues, global attention to them that I think have far been ignored across this country. Native American issues, I think, have been something that we talked about in places like New Mexico, and you talk about in places where you have a big, dominant Native American culture, and more importantly, when usually it seems to be they have something that everybody else wants, right? When they have oil and gas, or when they have land that people want. Otherwise,
right-of-way issues.
That's right.
It's
Otherwise, it's just
complicated.
they're just kind of. It's not something that's risen to the forefront. But I think with the pipeline issue, that it really elevated a lot of those folks to the forefront, and a lot of those issues to the forefront. And I think it's made them national issues.
Andy, let me posit this to you. You know, my last indication was the amount of Native Americans or Navajo folks specifically living off the reservation but living here in Bernalillo County was an enormous amount of folks. And I have to imagine that would be a very appealing thing to have somebody as a representative for the 1st Congressional District looking out for your interests, basically, in a way that has never probably happened before for Native American folks who are living here in the urban part of of our state. Would you agree with that? That's an interesting little wrinkle if that came to be.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I mean, I think there's probably a lot of people that would not be represented otherwise if they were living not in the metropolitan area, and now they see somebody who they can relate to, or hopefully they can relate to the constituents. Right. So yeah, I think that's probably pretty.
Has influence with the BIA, has influence with other issues about health care. I mean, it could be an enormous thing when you really think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mary mentioned the race as it stands now in the 1st Congressional race. It's a tough one. There's a lot of qualified women, you know, not even joking about it, that could be really a difficult race for Deb Haaland. How do you see this race sort of shaping up? Just sort of talking about the 1st Congressional race a little bit, kind of broaden that out.
So there's 6 candidates in it. On the Democrat side, there's only 1 on the Republican side. And on the Democrat side, we just had our pre-primary convention a couple of weeks ago, and the 2 women that were running for that seat, Deb Haaland and Antoinette Cedillo Lopez, were far and away the front runners. I mean, they really, especially Deb, took 35% of the vote of the pre-primary convention of that district in a 6-way race. I mean, that's like a landslide for one person.
Absolutely.
And then Antoinette Cedillo Lopez took 25%, also a very large amount. The rest of them didn't even make that 20% threshold, so they actually had to go back to voters and get more signatures. I think the rest of the pack has, there's varying degrees of name ID. One of them is Pat Davis. He's a current city councilman. He's got some positives, but he's also got some negatives with regard to his vote and his position with the art project. Yeah. Another one is Damon Martinez, who has name ID as the former U.S. attorney for this district for New Mexico. And then there's a couple of others that are in the mix that have much less name ID that I think are going to have a tougher go of it. So I think it's still, you know, we're roughly 2.5 months away from the primary. We're really going to see, I think, a lot of increased media attention at this point, paid media in particular.
That's right.
And those that have raised the money for it are really going to, I think, start to, you know, get higher name ID.
That's right.
But again, I haven't seen any polls. I don't know if there's been a lot of polling done. If there has, they haven't shared them publicly.
Right.
So that may mean that whoever did the poll isn't happy with the results. Typically is the way it goes.
Yes.
But I think she's got an opportunity for it. I mean, she's definitely got the opportunity to get her name ID up there.
Yeah.
But I think she's going to have to show the policy chops.
That's a good point there. Now, another topic I mentioned up top, where Albuquerque Journal, an article this week detailed an unusual legal dispute over a 60-second radio ad involving 2 candidates who aren't even running for the same office. That case is playing out this month in court. Andy, you wrote about this lawsuit when it was first filed this summer. It gives a little background on what's going on here, the players involved.
Yeah. So when it was first filed, it's filed by current Land Commissioner Aubrey Dunn against a candidate for Land Commissioner. And when it was filed, Aubrey Dunn had not announced what he was going to do. So at that time, it was kind of, is he going to run? And especially when he filed this lawsuit, there were some questions of, is he trying to defend his spot here? But ultimately, it came over some radio ads from the candidate Garrett Veneklassen, who implied that Aubrey Dunn did some sort of move to set himself up financially with a power line through a ranch that he owns. So that's just kind of the background of it.
Ostensibly, the Dunns had bought this ranch, and the accusation is they bought it knowing that this power line was going to go through it, and he stood to gain financially from it. And of course, the Dunns are denying everything. It's interesting how this defamation suit, though, defamation's a tough thing to defend or to prove, I should say, in court, and the judge involved, rather, has said the same thing, said, there's a certain threshold that has to be met here.
Yeah, especially it goes back to the First Amendment, and then especially political speech, political ads are pretty well covered under that. I think the radio ad was really careful to word things that implied things. If you really go back and listen to the way the ad says things, I think at one point Garrett Veneklassen says, "Coincidence? Nah," So he doesn't really. He does kind of throw some accusations,
Right.
but not super directly.
That's right.
So it's
and in the court hearing, of course, not of course, but he said, I wasn't talking about him directly, Dan. I was talking about, like, all politicians have a way to grease themselves. These kind of races don't usually get this hot. What do you attribute this to? Is it the personalities involved?
Land commissioner race has
defamation-
gotten pretty hot the last few cycles.
Okay.
I mean, it's been a pretty, back in the 80s and early 90s, it was just, sometimes you couldn't even find a candidate to run for it.
Right.
Once Pat Lyons won it,
Yes.
and it was one of the few seats that Republicans could win statewide, it got a lot of attention from Republicans, and so there's been a push to keep that seat. It's also been a real, there's a real push by both parties, because it means something when you start trying to go after the permanent fund to have the State Land Commission come in and say, this is what you're doing, this is where the forecasts are. So much of that money comes. I'm not surprised that this has gotten to where it's been. I mean, you look at, I think that Aubrey Dunn is running for the U.S. Senate. I think he's living by the adage that there's no such thing as bad media, just spell your name right. I think that getting out there and taking this on is not a surprise. I mean, his son is defending him. His son is his own attorney.
Right.
His son's running for office as well.
Sure.
So, I think that I think there's a good push by the Libertarians to say, look, this is another opportunity for us to get out there. I do think it's interesting that it's sort of kind of flies in the face of the Libertarians and less government that one of their leading guys is talking about, squashing someone's ability to say something.
That's right.
I think at the end, when you're an elected official, the ability to prove defamation, it's almost unattainable. I mean,
right.
it literally is almost unattainable.
I mean, Mary, proof of malice, of course, what the judge was saying, look, there are bigger issues at here, one of them being First Amendment rights and free speech issues, and he really was quite strong on that. What was your sense of that, where the judge was coming from here?
Yeah, the judge, I think, was certainly underscoring the long history and what Dan had said about, like, it's the First Amendment gives the press or people, the public in general, just like unbelievable wide latitude to say and to criticize and to poke and to see, this is part of our democratic process. It's not, I'm not gonna, even that said, I mean, that's at the end of the day up to the voters to decide, they want what sort of campaign,
That's right.
what they want to believe, what not. But there's just incredible freedom, and he was citing some, that landmark lawsuit, New York Times versus Sullivan as well.
That's right. That's right, too. That goes back and set that precedent. Pick up on that if you would. Again, this proof of malice thing by Mr. Dunn, very hard thing to prove. I'm curious why he would do this, knowing that a threshold was probably difficult to get to. Do you know what I mean? It's a hard one.
Well, there's a lot of
defamation.
reasons why people, engage in litigation. Sometimes it's
Right.
not always for, authentic reasons in terms of the issue. Certainly, I think what Dan says in terms of the name ID and
That's right.
getting the press is a factor. The fact that you don't necessarily need to pay for an outside attorney if you've got your son doing it for you, that might be
right.
a factor. I don't know.
That's right.
But I will say this much, is this is an example of, and I certainly support the First Amendment, but it's an example of, once again, a candidate making outlandish claims and the public not having an ability to fact check that. And that makes it really, for me, it's very frustrating, because when I hear that ad, I mean, I know that there's a lot of environmental groups that are supporting Veneklassen, and they've, environmentalists in general that supported him. There's also a lot of environmentalists that worked on that SunZia line and worked very hard for many years. I did as myself when I was within RDC in ensuring that there was a full record in terms of the environmental siting that went along with where that line would go.
That's right.
And to suggest that any one rancher can determine what an entire multi-state process that went through NEPA, a federal law, and had thousands of comments and public participation, it just sort of flies in the face of like, you don't understand what this process is. And also the SunZia line, one of the reasons a lot of environmentalists were interested in, as was U.S. Senator Martin Heinrich and others, is because it's supposed to bring renewable energy from New Mexico to
right.
market in Arizona.
That's right.
And that same ad where he basically, on the one hand, says that somehow Aubrey Dunn had a say in where that line was sited, and at the end says, I want to work on bringing renewable energy to New Mexico. I was
right.
like, oh my God, like did anybody who actually understands renewable energy listen to
That's
this
right.
ad or vet
That's
it
right.
beforehand?
It's a big
And
deal,
that
the
to me is
transmission
frustrating.
lines to get power out of our state.
Yeah, that
That's
was the whole,
done.
it's a merchant
exactly.
line.
We've been
and
wanting this for a decade.
Absolutely,
So.
and it has been over a decade that this
That's
line's
right.
been
That's right.
on the drawing board, and so it's very disingenuous, I think,
Yeah.
for a candidate to take this issue on without having real facts behind it.
We'll see what comes of this. Good reporting, Andy. It's really interesting to read. We'll have to end that there. Now, when we come back to the line, we'll have an update on reforms in the Albuquerque Police Department.